Murray Goodz, oldest son of Katie Albert and Joseph Goodz. Sarah and Isaac Albert were amongst the first Jews to settle in Sainte-Sophie. The Goodz family ran the Goodz Hotel in the 30s and 40s. He went to Scotland School in Sainte-Sophie, Fort Rose School in New Glasgow, Laurentian School in St. Jerome, that was high school, right? Yeah. St. Agatha High School, and worked summers and holidays at Sainte-Sophie Lumber Company, sawmill and building materials, the family firm. He has a Bachelor of Architecture from McGill University in 1964, and he's married to Naomi Singerman, and they have 3 children. He has a partnership. He's a partner in Tolchinsky and Goodz, Architects 1970, the firm that recently designed the YMHA extension, renovations, extension to Cummings House, the Cummings Golden Age Center, and the Gelber Conference Center.
The photograph that you're looking at is Baron de Hirsch, born Moritz Hirsch to a Bavarian family, a very prominent banking family. He was something of a banking maven and became very interested in the development of railroads, and he amassed an amazing fortune. I mean, $100 million American, let's say, in those days was really a lot of money, not like today. Okay. He was an intimate of kings, princes, Republican heads of government. In fact, he was both friend and financial advisor to Bertie, Prince of Wales, later Edward VII of England. He is a philanthropist. He's a major philanthropist. He has invented Jewish philanthropy of the late 19th century, together with a few people like the Rothschilds, the Montefiores, the Warburgs. And they have established, although he is one of the main proponents, they have established a major concern with the plight of Eastern European Jewry. I don't have to take you through the story. Everyone here is reasonably familiar with the pogroms and the civil unrest and the unpalatable condition of Jews in Tsarist Russia throughout most of the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th century. He creates and funds in 1891 in Paris the Jewish Colonization Association. And through the JCA, he encourages the resettlement of Jews in the USA, in Argentina, in Canada, in Palestine. He is tremendously successful at this. He believes in the Jewish affinity, as he claimed it, for farming. Morris Hirsch survives until 1896, unfortunately, long enough to see his beloved France, because it is France that honors him with the baroncy, his Baron de Hirsch, as opposed to Graf Hirsch, because he witnesses the beginning of the Dreyfus affair that tears Republican France apart, and he dies in the midst of this incredible turmoil in France. This famous Republic of Liberty, Equality, and Fraternity turns out to have feet of clay, and although he acknowledges the efforts of Theodor Herzl to establish a national home for Jews in Palestine, he continues to support his own private diaspora. In Canada, many Jews are encouraged to farm the prairies near Winnipeg, good farmland. In Quebec, a handful of Jews find themselves in the foothills of the Laurentians, Sainte-Sophie, Glasgow, Saint-Lin-Laurentides, near Joliet, and not such good farmland. We're talking about Canada, a relatively underpopulated country. Some people would argue it still is underpopulated. It has an immigration policy that favors those who would agree to farm. It encourages immigrants, not just Jews, Ukrainians, Romania, everybody. It encourages everybody to go out west, be really where the farmland is good and very cheap and very reasonable. Remember, the Trans-Canada Railway has only gone in 30 years previous. There's lots of farmland available, huge blocks of land, basically for free. All you had to do was farm them. But no, these Jews want to farm in Quebec. They are encouraged by the government, one. Two, they regard farming as one method to be self-sufficient, not to work for somebody else, to have their own land. We're permitted to own land in most parts of Eastern Europe. They regard the they look at and acknowledge and understand that they have these subsidies available from the JCA through Baron de Hirsch, they're encouraged to go out there. Some do, some make it, many don't. There are a whole series of photographs that are going to be shown. What I can't show you are the photographs of the dozens of families that didn't make it, that spent one winter in Sainte-Sophie or in Glasgow and said, forget about it, okay? Remember, we're talking about 120 years ago or 110 years ago. The farms are not electrified. There might have been some electricity in the village, but not on the farms. No telephone service. In the wintertime, you move by sleigh and horse if you move at all. And it could be a very lonely place. And the poverty among some of the farmers was outrageous. This is my family. This photograph was taken 100 years ago. And the reason I know it was taken 100 years ago is that this gentleman is my father. And he was born in 1913. This is early 1914, and in a few months, a Serbian radical is going to assassinate the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And we all know what follows. This photograph is taken in a little town called Zaritsky in the Ukraine, south of Kiev. The Jews, because they were Jews. But secondly, they spoke a language that was eerily similar to German. They were regarded as traitors, as spies, as fifth columnists. If they had a rough time in Tsarist Russia before, this was worse. But worse was yet to come, because Russia collapsed. The Tsar abdicates. Let's see, what's the progression? There is a provisional government. The provisional government eventually comes under the control of Kerensky. Kerensky is forced out by the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks find themselves in a civil war with a whole bunch of countries like the United States, Britain, and France fighting on the side of the whites. Admiral Kolchak, Denikin, not nice guys, very right-wing, very reactionary, very not in love with the Jewish people. And when the whites and the reds come together, and one of them takes a village, they'll stand a few people up and shoot them as sympathizers for the other side, and then the other side takes the village a couple of weeks later and does the same thing. And after a while, the population begins to dwindle. My grandfather, Moshe, is taken out and shot. He survives. It's a shoulder wound. Somehow his wife, Celia, known to us as Tsizzy. Okay, you'll be hearing a little bit more about Tsizzy. Tsizzy pulls him out from underneath a group of dead bodies, gets him some medical attention, and this finally got my grandfather's attention. It's time to leave. They make their way across parts of the Ukraine. They try to get to Romania. They have a terrible time. They have to bribe people. Luckily, her father, that guy, Kusavetsky, a very successful entrepreneur, businessman in Russia. He happens to make boots. He makes her a set of boots with a hidden compartment. The gold coins go into the hidden compartment, and she bribes their way across South Russia. They make it to the river, across which is Romania, and the boatman, who is not allowed to take them across, he does this because he makes a pretty penny at it, says, you'll have to drown your daughter, your infant daughter, because she may cry while we're crossing the river. And she says, no, good for her. And she says, no, I'll starve her during the day and I'll breastfeed her at night and she won't make a sound. And or at least that's the way the story is told in the family. They make it to the immigrant sheds in Romania. This is a story, by the way, that I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have about your families. It's not unusual. I tell it only to reinforce the fact that these people didn't elect to come to Quebec, to Sainte-Sophie, to farm. They ran for their lives. And they didn't speak the languages. And just to finish the story, by the way, they make it to Romania, the immigrant sheds. They're sponsored by, of all people, this fellow, who has made it to New York a few years earlier, and who is now a strapping 19-year-old in New York, and sponsors them. They get on a boat in Antwerp to go to New York. The boat is redirected mid-ocean because the quota at Ellis Island has been filled for the year. They find themselves in St. John, New Brunswick. They're the immigration officer there says you can come into Canada even though you have no sponsor, but you have to go to the prairies. You have to go to Winnipeg and get a farm and farm there. Immigration. They say sure, if they understood. And they get on the train. There's a snowstorm in Montreal. They get off in Montreal. They say it's enough. That's enough of that train. So that's the way they make it to Montreal. And then through a lot of trials, tribulations, vicissitudes, and other problems, they find themselves electing to go to Sainte-Sophie. This is a map which I drew personally, but with the help of Ruby Polsky. He had this amazing ability to remember not only where the farms were, but where farms had changed hands 3 or 4 times. He knew the names of all of the progression of ownership. So here is the Sklar farm, which becomes the Abramovich farm, which becomes the Gelman farm. By the way, just speaking about Gelman, one of the other reasons that people went to the farms, and this is not a noble thing necessarily, was that if you were on a farm, you weren't going to get conscripted. So in the First World War and in the Second World War, sometimes people would get themselves onto a farm to avoid conscription. But the young Mr. Gelman, 19 years old, enlists in the Canadian Army and dies in France in 1944. So here is Sainte-Sophie. You'll notice, by the way, that the name of the river, it's not really a river, okay? It's not even a creek. But the name of that body of water that runs through Sainte-Sophie is called the Jordan River. How appropriate. And apparently the naming of that river had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that Jews would come 100 years later. This was the route from Saint Jerome, which was the big city, so to speak, that brought you into the village. This was the village area. And this was the route that continued to New Glasgow. And this was the route that took you out to Saint-Lin-Laurentides. And this went to where we picked blueberries. And one of the things I might have mentioned before is that originally there were Scots. Well, they were Scot-Canadians, but their origin was Scotland, and a little bit of Scots-Irish. And they had set up shop in this part of the world, New Glasgow. And the roads here, first Paisley, second Paisley, fourth Paisley, and the name of the school, Scotland School. So there was a little bit of that heritage that flowed through to the community, and I can't begin to take you through it. But some of you may be interested in knowing that Putters is right over, where is it? S&G, no. Anyways, right in that area, run by Alvin and Greta Goodz, and a mighty empire it is. Also my uncle Jack, who just passed away, Jakey Goodz, had his, of course his wife still has it, Riverview Poultry, right in that area. There aren't too many businesses left. One of the very large businesses, which Pearl will talk about, was Laurentian Poultry, and they were located here. This is where the synagogue was. This is where the cemetery, is, I should say. This is where the cemetery is. This was Goodz Hotel. This is the church. Remember, the early Jewish farmers moved into a French-Canadian community. Most people were Catholic. This is what we grew up with. The tolling of the bells, to a great extent, with a few exceptions, because there are going to be a few exceptions, the Jewish people got on very, very well with the French Canadians. As a matter of fact, the Jewish people didn't know how to farm. They didn't know how to hold a plow behind a horse and plow a straight line. The French Canadians and some of the Scottish Canadians taught them how. They were hopeless. They were in real bad trouble at the beginning. They were in bad trouble afterwards as well. The parish hall had ladies' bazaar, Jewish ladies' bazaars. They showed movies, old black and white movies. There was a richness to the life on the one hand, but on the other hand, whoever heard of a gymnasium or a library or a public space or a park? What I said about the French Canadians applies also to the Ukrainians. They got along well with the Ukrainians. A generation earlier, or 15 or 20 years earlier, in another place in Eastern Europe, there would never have been that kind of communion. It's a photograph of My father at probably about 25 years of age. My uncle Saul, who I mentioned earlier, my Baba Zizi, and my grandfather Moshe, my uncle Benny, my aunt Annette, my aunt Ida, and Jake. Ida and Benny still around, except for Ida, who married a pleasurenik, meaning somebody who came there as a tourist, you know. And she married him when she was 16 years old. Okay? She's probably about 13 or 14 there. Except for Ida, they all stayed in Sainte-Sophie. They all made their livelihood, somehow earned a livelihood in Sainte-Sophie, farming, wood cutting, timber. Annette married Harry Zaritsky. You're going to be hearing from Pearl Zaritsky, so the families, you know, get combined. My father marries Katie Albert, and Albert, remember Isaac Albert? The daughter of Isaac Albert. And the community, you know, knits together somewhat. Benny initiates the pickle factory, by the way. He's the father of Alvin. And but Alvin takes it to new heights, and Greta, Greta's really the brains, right? Alvin's not here. Okay. But my Baba, she was really the mover and groover. He never really got over leaving Russia. And I think there were other people like that. He used to tell me, next year we're going to go back. And this was after he had been here for 30 years. And I remember him with that, hand-rolled cigarette in his face, which almost never left. And he never really learned to speak much English or much French. I spoke to him in some broken Yiddish. She's holding me. Okay? So we know this photograph was taken in 1942 because I was born in Hanukkah 1941. Okay? And that is Goodz Hotel behind her, the only photograph I could find of Goodz Hotel. Goodz Hotel was a response to the need that was expressed by Montreal Jews for a place to go, for some fresh air, for a place to swim, although God bless them, the Jordan River was polluted. Even in those days, somewhat polluted. And some good food. As a matter of fact, there's a story, just unsubstantiated, that she would promise to put 10 pounds on any young lady that was sent to her for the summer. This is sort of the opposite of Weight Watchers, you know. We're now talking about emaciated young ladies from the Bouillon and Le Gauchetière and Papineau, who needed a few pounds to be appropriately zoftic to make them properly marriageable. And she was the cook, she was the laundress, she was the manager, she was the banker. She made that place hum, and she made her boys and her girls make it hum. You know, she was a terror. And but she introduced to this family a standard of living that they had never had before, because suddenly they had folding money that people would pay them to be able to come to Goodz Hotel. Many farms would set aside a couple of rooms, or even move out of their farmhouse and live in the chicken coop for a little while, and give their homes over to the pleasurenicks, who came from Montreal. And but this was a real effort to industrialize the tourist industry of Sainte-Sophie. It was not the most elaborate affair, and Freddy later will tell you about Cottenberg's, which in Glasgow, which was certainly head and shoulders above Goodz Hotel. There was also Cedar Villa, run by the Shapoznik family, and this was in many ways this saved the community and gave them an injection of cold hard money, which of course, as you know, begins to circulate, and it lifts everybody off the poverty line. The marriage of my parents, by the way, my father did not own that suit. My father, Jill Goodz, and Katie Albert, although by this time she might have been Katie Goodz. Two families that had been there for quite some time. The Alberts came earlier, the Goodzes came later, but they were certainly mainstays of the Jewish community at the time. And I thought just for fun, I'd show you what my mother looked like as a dead-end kid when she was about 5 or 6 on the steps of the general store. The general store was right across from the church. After the farmers went to church, they went to the store. And that's when real business was done. And that's her brother George, by the way, beside her, George Albert. There's a general store. Back in the 1920s, maybe the 30s, it was then run and owned by my grandfather, AskAbigail. And it was later sold to my uncles, Saul Goodz, who married Rose Greenspoon Goodz, who, so you see, it goes round and round. But I spent a lot of time on that porch and on those stairs as a teenager, not quite a teenager, like as a 14-year-old, as we used to say, watching the tractors go by. My father, a portrait when, I don't know who would have taken this photograph and why and where he found the tie, but he's about 23 and he's a handsome devil, isn't he? And he by the way, the rumors that part of his responsibilities at Goodz Hotel was to make sure that no unattached female went home without having had a decent summer romance are completely unsubstantiated. My bar mitzvah, I'm there. My brother Danny, my cousin Myrna, and Alvin, who we've mentioned before in association with Putters. My parents, my grandparents, and this is the good side of the family. There's another photograph, I think, like this of the Albert side. Jack and Mary. Mary, which is really Marielle Racine. So there was a little bit of proper cross-fertilization, shall we say, from time to time. Healthy, good for the genes. My Aunt Ida, now a grown woman, very pretty. Her husband Harry, my cousin Carol, a year older than I was. And this is the little boy at the bottom of that photograph who sponsored the family to come to New York, Nathan Pashoff. He invited to Montreal for my bar mitzvah. And I had just been called to the Torah at the Sainte-Sophie shul, which was a good deal more primitive than it is today. My Uncle Benny, my Uncle Saul, Rose Greenspoon, Peggy Mintz, who, by the way, came to Sainte-Sophie as a teacher and married my Uncle Benny. Everybody here seems to have owned their own suit and dress. But not here. This is the Albert family, about 1928, 29. The marriage of my Uncle Saul, S-A-U-L, and the girl next door. The girl from, let's see, Rose Weitzman, the Weitzman farm. There was a farm owned by the Weitzmans, and she was the pride and joy of that family. My grandfather, of course, emigrated to England with the name Halprin, but like many others, he met a friendly immigration officer who said, "Albert, that sounds good," and he became Albert. So this was the family. Now I'm told that all of those elegant tuxedos were owned by the photographer. That was the way it was done. You went to the photographer, you disrobed, you put on something that was almost your size, you got in front of the camera, and it was a package deal. This is Isaac Albert. He's an older man now. He's sitting in the retail area of Sainte-Sophie lumber. This is the building materials shop that my father ran with his help. He's reading a Yiddish newspaper, and he's sitting on some sacks of cement. He deserted from the Tsar's army. He didn't really approve of it. He had been impounded. It wasn't unusual in those days. The military police would come into the village and take away the 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds, badly mistreated, both by officers and non-Jewish conscripts. He makes his way back to the village. They meet him outside with a few shekels and a little bit of food and say, "They're waiting for you in the village, goodbye." And he never sees that part of his family again. He makes his way somehow, odd jobs, speaking languages that are not understood where he's going, except for Yiddish. Yiddish gets him access in certain areas. Finds himself on a dock in Hamburg, sits down. He wants to go to London. He understands there's a landsman there that might be able to offer him some work, give him a place to stay. is crying. He's a 17-year-old. A man comes over to him and says, "What's wrong?" He's speaking Yiddish. The guy is obviously well-to-do, gives him a few pennies and says, "Here's the boat fare to get to London. You have to send it back to me," which he did.
Pearl Zaritsky Cooper, she went to school in Sainte-Sophie, but later Montreal, and later Temple University in Philadelphia. She was born in Sainte-Sophie, where they're operating a poultry farm, slaughterhouse, and a feed mill in nearby Saint Jerome. As president of l'Association des Abattoirs Avicoles du Québec in the late 90s for a few years, was on the board of directors of Canadian Poultry and Egg Processors Council from 89 to 2003, on the board of directors of Chicken Farms of Canada as a poultry processor member. While on that last board, was on both the finance and the promotion committees. She was also the first and only advisory board, was on the first and only advisory board of CFIA, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, as advisory board for the Federal Minister of Agriculture in the middle 1990s. And she received the Governor General's Award in 1992, Canada's 125th anniversary.
On the left is a picture of my mother, and yes, it is her dress. As a matter of fact, the dress belonged to my Auntie Gertie, my mother's older sister. And on the right is my father. No, it is not his suits, and that's on their wedding day, November the 14th, 1937. My mother was born in Montreal. She had the opportunity, as did every one of her siblings, to go to university. She went to Macdonald College and became a teacher. When she graduated Macdonald College, the Protestant School Board of Greater Montreal was not hiring Jewish people to teach them. And so my grandfather had heard about a small community north of Montreal that needed a teacher to teach English, but someone who could understand Yiddish, because all of the elders of the community only spoke Yiddish and very little English, certainly no French. My Uncle Julius, when we were sitting Shiva for my mother in February, told me of the story that when he and Uncle Phil drove her to Sainte-Sophie in the summertime on these dirt roads, there wasn't even crushed stone on the roads, bumpity on these ruts with the car that Uncle Phil had. And then they went to be interviewed by Mr. Kahansky. My mother was offered a salary of $400 for the year. She was to room at Mr. Kahansky's house, and I'm embarrassed to tell you how much he wanted in rent, a little over half of her salary. But she had no choice. There were no other jobs available. At least Montreal was about an hour and a half away by car from Sainte-Sophie, so her parents could visit her. Next door to the Kahansky family at the time was the Lagano family. And Lily Lagano, when we interviewed her just for our September event, said to me, "I used to walk to school with your mother, and she taught me. I was 1 year old. She showed me a book that my mother had given her when she was in grade 1, presented to Lily Lagano for proficiency in reading. She still had it. My mother started teaching in Sainte-Sophie in 1932. And on one of their walks, Lily said to my mother, "You know, Miss Frank, I really don't like the name Lily." So my mother said to her, "Well, what would you like to be called?" So she said, "I really prefer Lila." So the following year, when Lily Lila Lagano was in school, my mother wrote her a note saying, "Dear Lila, proficiency in reading." When we interviewed Ruby Polsky, and Marie told you how he was like this tough guy and talked with this, that, and these and those, and I said, my cousin Elaine said to Ruby, "Well, what did you think about Miss Frank as your teacher?" I have to tell you, tears came into this man's eyes, and he said, "Oh, Miss Frank, she was something special." Benny Polsky also used to tell me whenever we went to synagogue, for years and years, "Your mother was the best teacher." My mother was very, very well respected by her students who still remember her. Whoever is still alive came to her funeral in February, and it was really very touching. Just another little story. When Javi and I were planning my parents' 50th anniversary a number of years ago, about 27 years ago, Mickey Abramovich Mickey Allen, you probably know him as Mickey Allen. Mickey Abramovich came to me and he said, Pearlie, I know I'm not on your guest list, but your mother was very special to me. And I would like, if you don't mind, to be invited to the anniversary, and I will act as the MC. And he told stories about Plezhnikas, how his family, because they lost their father at a very young age, moved into the chicken coop to have rent rooms to summer guests. But one of the most touching stories of all was when he said, you know, we hardly had anything to eat. There were times when Mrs. Goodz, Murray's grandmother next door to us, would have a lot of guests in the summertime and always had a little bit extra soup. And she would always send a tepple of soup to us to eat. But your mother always had a jar of jam in her desk drawer, because my mother's family, my grandmother actually, had a little dépanneur, bodega kind of thing. And they used to come there with 2-day-old bread that Mrs. Abramovich had, and would say, please, Miss Frank, would you put a little bit of jam on my bread? They barely wore shoes. She would make sure that they had a scarf. If not, she would bring them a scarf and make sure that they would be able to go outdoors and be warm in the wintertime. Well, she met my father. I don't know, we used to kibitz with him, Javi and Edie and I, as she was walking past past his family farm to go to school, and you know, she was this cute little, tiny little redhead. And he picked her up, I guess, I don't know. They started going out and got married in 1937. My parents lived in my father's family's house for a little bit of time together with Auntie Becky and Uncle Izzy. But my mother really didn't like the lack of privacy, and so they were married in November, and the following summer, my father bought a farm. He had a few dollars, he borrowed some money from his father, and bought a farm and continued working. At that time, my father was hauling gravel, plowing the roads, cutting lumber and selling it to anybody that would be building something. But there was a man who lived on First Paisley. We lived on Second Paisley, actually. There was a man who lived on First Paisley. His name was Harry Zaritsky. Harry was older than my father and was interested in farming, and somehow or other he learned about a course being given at MacDonald College in animal husbandry, and decided to take the course. And he did, he took the course. It was, I think, a 6 or 8 month course on animal husbandry. He came back to Sainte-Sophie and started a chicken farm. Well, Willie Zaritsky looked at Harry and said, you know, Mary, this is how we're gonna make money. This is how we're gonna get rich. I have to have a chicken farm. So we spoke to Harry, and Harry said, not a problem, Willie, you're a smart guy. All you have to do is go to the bank and get some money. I think you probably need about $300 to buy some chickens and put up a chicken coop, and you will have some chickens. So my father went to the Banque Nationale de Quebec and asked to borrow $300, and they refused him. So we went back to Harry, and he said to Harry, I don't understand, they're refusing me. So Harry said, come, we're going to go to the Bank of Montreal. We've been dealing with them even to this day. Same bank, slightly different address. And Harry Zaritsky signed for my father for the $300. He built a little chicken house, bought some chickens. And I remember as kids, we used the chickens that he had, of course, at the time were layers, because there was no such thing as broilers or fryers as we eat now. There were layers, and we used to put the chickens in the chicken house in the wintertime, take them out and put them on the farm, free range in the summertime, go around helping to collect the eggs. In our house, actually, when one of the things that my mother, I'm just backtracking a little, one of the things that my mother and her family were appalled at is that these farmers that lived on Second Paisley didn't have any running water in their houses. They had an outdoor pump and eventually got a pump in sink in the kitchen, but they all had outhouses. However, shortly after I was born in 1941, my father got a duodenal ulcer, needed a toilet in the house, and so we had that as well, even though in the summer times we used the outhouse. In any case, wherever they had the bathroom in the house, just beyond it, he added another room, and we used to call it the egg candling room. That's where we collected all the eggs. My mother would wash them. We would help her a little bit. We had to be very careful. Separated the ones that were cracked and not cracked. She would candle them to make sure there were no little broken blood vessels in it, and my father would put them in boxes, drive to Montreal, and sell them on Roy Street at Rachel Market. And then, of course, he would sell these spent hens after 65 weeks. Chickens no longer lay eggs, time to sell them, buy a new crop, and he would sell them to Co-op Betteray, where they slaughtered them and sold them for, well, he didn't say, at the beginning he used to sell it to the kosher market on Rachel Street. In the middle 1950s, my Uncle Bill had a friend, Joe Waxman, who was an accountant in Montreal. And Joe had a client who used to buy stuff that was left over on the trains and the ships that was not picked up and would sell it. And one day Joe gets in touch with my father and he says, you know, Willie, you're the only one I know that's a farmer. Somebody left 2 boxes of, looks like baby chickens or it's marked baby turkeys on it, but I don't know what they look like. I've never seen it, but it looks like chickens. Maybe you would like them. So my father said, sure. Never, when he looked at it, and there were 150 turkeys. And my father got them, and he put them in one of his chicken houses, and wasn't sure what to feed them. He got a little bit of food from the chickens, a little bit extra. Every single one of those turkeys died. Well, for Willie Zaritsky, this created a challenge, and this was something he could not accept, this failure, and so he bought some more turkeys. And he taught them how to eat by putting colored marbles in their food. I remember that, putting colored marbles in their food. And that was the way they ate. In those days, people ate turkey at Easter and at Christmas time. And my father used to sell the turkeys to one of the plants in Co-op Betteray. Well, in 1959, business was not so good. And the gentleman from Co-op Betteray said, you know, Willie, we're not going to buy your turkeys this year. So Willie said, well, what am I going to do? He went out, he bought a hand plucking machine. I don't know if you know what it is, but it's a barrel with rubber fingers. My cousin Alan used I remember, I could picture it today. We slaughtered the turkeys, bled them, he removed the feathers with the plucking machines. Hobby Edie and I used to pull out the other little pin feathers and cut them, and he used to sell them in Montreal, and that time we sold them New York dressed, which meant that all of the guts and stuff was still inside. And then in 1961, my father built his first slaughterhouse, and in 1963 expanded it by 5 times, and it was in operation until 2003, until our family sold it. Going back to the kind of life that people lived in Sainte-Sophie. Remember, it was a dirt road. We lived on Paisley 2. A number of other people lived on Paisley 1. And when Murray showed you the map, what he forgot to tell you is that road where the putter company is. We used to call that the road to the village. To this day, I have no idea. It's now Rue Masson. But at that time, I have no idea what it was called. However, the Sainte-Sophie group used to get together on a regular basis and have some kind of social. This is a photograph of a tea party. They used to have on a Sunday, is that it? Okay. On a Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon, in the summertime, of course, the families used to get together, have tea and cookies. It's certainly homemade cookies and cakes. The kids toast, which was made on this one wooden stove. Nobody had central heating. It was one wooden stove in the kitchen. Put the toast on it. Still made the very, very best toast. It's to tell you who's here. This person with her back to us is Murray's grandmother, Goodz. This lady is my paternal grandmother, Rachel Zaritsky. Murray's mother, Katie Goodz. my Aunt Mary, who married my father's older brother Jack, their son Harold, my Auntie Sadie, my mother's sister, who used to come visit us in the summer. She's sitting right there next to Leonard Primuth. This is Mary Lagano, Lila Lagano's oldest sister. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Sonia Frank. Ida Clayman with Karen Clayman as a little baby sitting on her lap. Behind her is my mother, Mary Frank Zaritsky. Next to her, my father, that skinny guy with the braces that he wore for his whole life. My Uncle Eli Wall, Auntie Sadie's husband. Rose Goodz, Rose Greenspoon Goodz. Harry Clayman. My mother's father, Aaron Frank. That's me, and right behind me is my sister Javi. Carol Goodz. That's Karen. I believe that is Betty Goodz, I'm not sure. Myrna Goodz. Murray Goodz. My cousin Yossi Zaritsky, and my Auntie Annette, who was married to my father's brother as well. This is a book from the school. The names of all the students with their marks. This happened to be in the year that my mother was a teacher. And this is a copy in English of the minutes of the board minutes of the, well, one would say the PTA, one would say the school board, the Scotland School Board, one would say the Jewish community of Sainte-Sophie, all and the same. The trustees, the board of directors was all the same. The minutes were written in English and or Yiddish. At some point they were translated. Just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that they talked about, they would discuss slaughter prices. Fowl 10 cents, spring caps 25 cents, full caps 50 cents. Nobody's allowed to kill his animals and fowl by another shochet. The community hired a shochet, and if the farmers either slaughtered their stuff themselves or hired another shochet, the fine for the farmers would be $25 and the fine for the butchers $50. The shochet was not allowed to leave Sainte-Sophie to go to another community without permission, without notifying the trustees. Mr. Kahansky would get $25 for the honor of cleaning out the toilet since he's the chairman. Imagine, be careful when you run for president. All taxpayers should pay their dues, meaning taxes, and for Jewish teaching, not a day later from the 5th of March, and I'm quoting 1922, those that can't pay should come to the secretary treasurer and give him notes for their dues. It must also be mentioned that most of the members were present and everything was agreed upon, and although some of the members were excited, they all departed as good friends and everything was forgiven. Now this stuff, the parents of Willie Zaritsky promised to see that their child doesn't bother the Stevenson girl anymore. Mr. Simpson demanded payment of $5 for making 2 bridges crossing the ditch in front of the schoolhouse. Younger children, this is a recommendation actually by my Uncle Alec, younger children till grade 3 learn Yiddish and the older ones should learn Hebrew. Going back to the previous page where there were remarks from the teacher, needless to say, because it was not part of the Protestant School Board of Greater Montreal, there was an inspector that came on a periodic basis, and he would have some kind of comment on the book, and he would say some of the stuff that he said was, the course of study is followed, but the students do not have all the required books. Remember, Murray, we had all these brand new books, torn apart, God knows how old they were. I'm not even sure if the history we learned, well, the history is probably appropriate, but the geography I'm not so sure of. And he would write, as the school is divided in 2 parts for the purpose of studying Hebrew, and as the teacher has only the higher grades in the morning and the lower grades in the afternoon, it is difficult to arrange a suitable timetable. I would suggest that scripture for the higher grades be taught by the Hebrew teacher. As pupils of a different language, I think they've made good progress. The school has a good understanding of the work in arithmetic. Since English is a foreign language, that was something that the inspector understood and made note of. This is a photograph of, I'll just show it to, wait. My Uncle Lizzie, my father, Henry Friedman, Benny Goodz, Jakey Zaritsky. I think that's Richard Dagenet, but I'm not really 100% sure. The rest of the people work for Super Sweet Feeds, and this is certainly in the 1950s when the production of laying hens in the area became closer to broilers and the kind of stuff that we eat on a regular basis. These are chickens that at that time took 7.5 weeks to come to maturity for slaughter in order to have the proper turnover. The farmers needed money, and what the feed companies used to do at the time, they used to lend the farmers money and then control their income. Sitting in the center here is Joan Goldberg. Joan and her family moved to New Glasgow in the middle 50s. As a matter of fact, her father Max worked as a plant manager for us until his untimely death in 1969. So this is a bridal shower for Joan when she was engaged to, his name was Gilles Hervieux. She currently calls him John. They got married, I think, in 1961. That's Joan. That's her mother, Ethel. Sarah Frimith, Mitra Rosenberg, Mary Zaritsky, my sister Hobby, Rose Goodz, Katie Albert, my Auntie Mary, that's Bunny Poole, Jay Rudy, Yetta Siegel, Yetta's sister Doris, I believe, Mary Goodz, and I'm not exactly sure who some of the others were, but that's the kind of thing that they did. They all got together. This is the synagogue. I believe that this building was probably built in the 20s. Previous to this, when I was in school here, and I went to school in this schoolhouse until 3rd grade, 4th grade, we went to the Fort Rose School. Right next to it would be where the shochet lived, where we learned Hebrew. This was a school and a synagogue. It used to have 2 floors. We learned Hebrew upstairs and English downstairs. The classes were split. This is the Polsky family. Father, Chaim Polsky, Max Polsky, Benny Polsky, Ruby. Benny and Ruby are still alive. Max unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And that's Max Polsky as a soldier. The Polskys came to Sainte-Sophie in the 20s. Mr. Polsky came to Sainte-Sophie originally as a peddler and then bought a farm there, went into the dairy business, moved to Belleville in the 1930s, but moved back. They were all my mother's students. May Polsky did not go to our school for very long because for most of her life, she, as a young girl, she lived in Belleville. However, she spent a lot of her time in Israel. She eventually became secretary to Golda Meir for years. When she came back to Sainte-Sophie, she's the one that introduced us to, at least me, and I think Murray could say the same thing, to Israeli dancing. That was the first time I ever learned to do the hora. She created a young Judea group. And that is the kids in shul. The central part of our social life growing up was in synagogue, certainly celebrating all of the Jewish holidays. It looks here as though we're celebrating Simchas Torah, which was the most fun of all. I remember there was this old man, Rabinovich, who used to climb up the center pole to kiss the ceiling after he had a couple of schnapps. We didn't know what it was at the time, but they always had plenty of schnapps and flags, and it was just a lot of fun. I mean, we went to school with horse and buggy. The road was muddy. I remember walking to school with big rubber boots and getting the boots stuck in the mud and, pulling your foot out and then the boot is there. And then, you saw where we lived, so going to the village was something we did every 2 weeks or so, where we'd get one of those mellow bar ice creams, and that was like the biggest treat of all. There's so many stories. I'm sure that you all share them. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share some of my fun stories with you.
Freddy Rudy. Born in Montreal to Jay Cohen and Willie Rudy of New Glasgow, and moved to New Glasgow at 8 days old. Attended Fort Rose School in New Glasgow, Laurentian High in St. Jerome. I moved with my grandparents to Montreal to complete my education and attended Northmount High School. I later graduated with a degree in Advanced Electronics Technology from Radio Canada, College of Canada, in 1959. Worked as supervisor of quality control at Fleetwood Corporation, manufacturers of TVs and stereos until 1965, making the daily commute to Montreal from New Glasgow. Boy, married Lillian Greenberg, who's sitting over here, in April 1965 and moved to Montreal. He started working at family-owned electro steam manufacturing and took over ownership when his cousin retired, and he's still there. They have a daughter, Beth, and a son, Mitchell, 8 grandchildren. His son, Mitchell, and family are living in Israel, and his daughter, Beth, and family live in Pierrefonds. He was vice president of Young Israel of Chamonix Synagogue and editor of the monthly synagogue bulletins from 1998 to 2001, and he's worked with organizing committee for the Jewish Farmers event in Sainte-Sophie, which took place on September 1st just recently, and I was there, as well as Lenora, my friend Lenora Neymark over here, and it was amazing. So I have to congratulate all of those who worked on that.
This is basically a map of New Glasgow, very similar to the one that Murray showed you of Sainte-Sophie, showing all of the Jewish farms that were there at the turn of the century. This was a road going to what was known as Kilkenny. The other road is going to Saint-Lin, and the New Glasgow village was just this short little piece here. All the rest of the surrounding area was Sainte-Sophie. Even though we always said we came from New Glasgow, we actually lived in the municipality of Sainte-Sophie. These are my great-grandparents, Ida and Nathan Cottenberg. This was taken in 1906 when they moved into the farm. They came in 1902 from Russia. This is Bubba Cottenberg feeding the chickens. It's a famous picture. It was in many of the newspapers. This was the picture everybody liked when they described Cottenberg's hotel. These were my grandparents, Shimshon and Sarah. He came from Yalowka, Poland, and she came from near Bialystok. The 2 daughters, Sarah and Mary, came to Canada. Louis Goldsman and his wife and daughter sponsored the 2 daughters to come here in 1901. They left the rest of the family in Europe. Louis Goldsman, who sponsored them, had a pants factory in Poland, and when he came here, he took the 2 daughters with him to Montreal, where he set up a pants factory. They worked for him, and eventually they met their husbands working in the pants factory. These are my parents. This is like the next generation. Willie and Jay Rudy and Harry and Micha Rosenberg. The 2 families lived together forever. Harry and Willie were the only 2 of the siblings of the 2 Rosenberg-Rudy families that were in New Glasgow. All the rest of the siblings moved away. Harry and Willie remained and married. They moved in together in 1905 or 1906. Their parents moved in together in the mill in New Glasgow, where Louis Goldsman set up a pants factory for them. This was, I guess this would be in early 1900s. This was, Cottenberg's Hotel was opened in 1910 by my great-grandparents, Ida and Nathan Cottenberg. The Zayda was a Talmud Chacham. He spent his time reading religious books and smoking his cigarettes, and I don't think anybody ever saw him do anything else, while Bubba Cottenberg started the farm and ran the complete outfit. This is a family of 3 generations here. This was Bubba Cottenberg, her daughter Sarah, who was my grandmother, Bella Rudy, who was Rosemary's mother, Min, that's Min, is that Min? Or is, yeah, that's Min, who married a Mizrahi and moved to California. This is Auntie Jenny. Jenny, in her childhood, was brain damaged by some illness and lived with us on the farm throughout the whole time. This was Nellie? Oh, Grace. This is Grace Aronoff. She was a from the Rosenberg side of the family. So Bella was the Rudy, and Grace and Min were Rosenbergs, and that's where we have 3 generations from the Cottenbergs. This is the original sign that was on the hotel in 1910. It now belongs to Janice Rosen at the Canadian Jewish Archives. This was down at the river. When the hotel was operating, everything was on schedule, and this was like a tradition. After lunch was served, and there were days when they served over 100 people, everybody would go down to the river, have their swim before coming back and getting ready to prepare for tea and then for supper. And this was the Lashigan River. It was probably as wide as this room, but it was like the river. My mother Jay, my Aunt Grace, my Aunt Essie Rudy, B.E. Rosenberg, Bella, who was Bella Rudy, Loafer, Micha Rosenberg, and that's our neighbor, Mrs. Degansky, who used to come and give us a hand whenever they needed extra help in the kitchen. This is my father. My father was elected mayor in 1972, and he was mayor for 8 years. Before that, he was on the city council for 15 years. When he passed away, they honored him by naming Rudy Street. Many people were wondering, how can he be the mayor of Sainte-Sophie when he lived in New Glasgow? And it's a very complicated thing, but everything except that tiny village of New Glasgow was Sainte-Sophie. In fact, in the old days, when it was a seigneury in the 1800s, New Glasgow actually owned Sainte-Sophie. This was the synagogue at Cottenberg's Hotel. The synagogue really started off in the house and then evolved into the dining room of the hotel. The early 50s, this building was built as a synagogue and a recreation hall. This was our show. Even after the hotel closed, we had services there for about 20 years of just the family alone, and we were probably about 50 people. That stained glass window was bought from a synagogue on Fairmount Street that was being demolished, and my cousin Nadia and I worked around the corner from there. When we heard the machinery coming, we went to see what the noise was, and they were just about to take down that last back wall of the synagogue, and we spied that beautiful stained glass window, and were able to convince the foreman to sell it to us. What you see here are the ruins of what's left of the mill where my family lived when they got to New Glasgow at first, and they operated a pants factory in there. It operated for about 2 years, and then they gave it up and moved to the farm in 1906. In the corner here was a Jewish-owned store. It was owned by the Bolinskis and then Max Siegel. Across the street from them, Mo Soloway and Enid Soloway. New Glasgow hasn't changed. It's still exactly the same, actually. The good old school, Forge Row School. This school was famous because anybody you would ask, where you went to school if you came from the country, the answer would always be, I went to the same school as Sir Wilfrid Laurier. He was born in St-Lin, which is about 6 miles away, and for 2 years of his life, his family sent him to Glasgow to learn English. The school is today an antique shop, but it's still standing and still looks very much the same. This is just a class picture. Miss Smith was our teacher. She taught at least 3 generations of us, and she taught from grade 1 to grade 7, grade by grade, all day long, one row to the next. Grade 1 was near the blackboard. When you got to the windows, it was time to leave New Glasgow and go look for your higher education. This is Saint-Lin, Sir Wilfrid Laurier's house, which is now a National Historical place. His father was a surveyor and did most of the land surveying for New Glasgow and Sainte-Sophie. This was the train station. The train ran until 1948, going from Saint-Lin through New Glasgow and Sainte-Sophie to Saint Jerome. This was probably the last Jewish family in Saint-Lin, and this is Mary Abramovich with her two brothers, George and Harry. They came to Saint-Lin in 1932 and stayed 15 years or so and left. They were like probably the last Jewish family in Saint-Lin.